I want this
Good.
book to be a book that readers pick up or listen to, and they're like, oh my gosh, that's my story, or that happened to me, or
Perfect.
yes, finally someone is talking about trauma. And
Yeah.
how do we transform the trauma without staying stuck?
Welcome to the Intertwined Life podcast. I am your host, Jenny Zentz. I am a wife and a mom on a mission. I've got a passion to help women discover practical ways to apply the power of God's word to our everyday stuff. I truly believe that our walks with the Lord should be seamlessly intertwined with our everyday lives. It should affect every move we make and every breath we take. So come on, let's do life together. You've got this, because He's got you. Hey guys, thanks for joining me. I am ready to bring you this great interview I just did with Suzie Hall. Suzie is a rock star. She is a global entrepreneur. She is a CEO and founder of 4 different companies. She's an award-winning interior designer, but she is also a woman who came to a point in her life where she knew she needed to stop, take a halftime, reevaluate, and reimagine, relinquish what wasn't helping, and rise into what God really had called her to do, to be the full potential of her God-given gifts. And now she is rocking life. And her new memoir just came out, and it is called Blessed Disruption. And it is not only about some of the hard things and really tough moments in her life that totally disrupted things for her and made her reevaluate, but also how that when we find ourselves plugging along, maybe running exhausted through life, and we're not even sure if we're running in the right direction, this book will inspire us to choose disruption, to intentionally disrupt our lives for a moment, to give ourselves times to stop, to take account, and to reimagine and reinvent, dream big with God, and step into the life He's called us to live with new purpose and new enthusiasm. I know you're going to enjoy this time with Suzie. You're going to feel encouraged and refreshed. And don't forget to head to the show notes so you can get your hands on your copy of Suzie's book. It just came out in May, and I believe this one can be a real game changer. All right, guys, enjoy this interview. All right, Miss Suzie Hall, welcome to the Intertwined Life podcast.
Thank you, Jenny. I'm really excited to be here.
I am really excited to have you here. I know this is going to be a great conversation for many people as we talk about your new memoir, Blessed Disruption. Before we jump into that, why don't you tell our listeners a little about yourself, your story, and what brought you to this point in your ministry and life?
Sure. And I'll try to keep it brief, and then we can dive in a little bit deeper as you'd like.
Sure.
I just had my 60th birthday, and I chose that day to launch my memoir, and it's actually Blessed Disruption into the world. And it almost felt like giving birth for the 4th time.
Right?
And it really is a calling that God has laid on my heart to share my story, to help others heal and grow, because that's what helped me so much during my transformation journey, which I know we'll get into. I grew up the daughter of a major college football coach, and that was a pretty unique and big lifestyle, come to find out, although I didn't know it at the time.
Sure.
And my mom became a born again Christian when I was 12 or 13. She went to a Billy Graham crusade in Seattle, where we lived at the time. Came home, and I was certain that she wanted Dad to stop coaching football and become a pastor. It was that like significantly different, right? And I was not very happy about that. And then Dad became a Christian the next year, and our family life really changed quite a bit. We'd always gone to church, a Lutheran church, and then we started going to a Baptist church, and church became very, very integral in our lives. And for me, and I read a lot about this in my memoir, I felt like I was always chasing the intersection between the sacred and the secular.
That's
And
good.
so that path for me held a lot, which I write about in my memoir. I had great childhood growing up, went to college in Tacoma, married my college sweetheart, moved to Boise, where I still live, and I had 2 daughters with him, divorced, remarried, had a son with my second husband, and then that resulted also in divorce. And I write about that in my memoir. So one of the things I think sets my memoir apart, perhaps, is one, there's two. One, it's, the journey of being a Christian woman through all of that. And
Hmm.
two, I go pretty deep, and I want this
Good.
book to be a book that readers pick up or listen to, and they're like, oh my gosh, that's my story, or that happened to me, or
Perfect.
yes, finally someone is talking about trauma. And
Yeah.
how do we transform the trauma without staying stuck? So fast forward to today, I'm a longtime entrepreneur. I own a few companies, and we design and furnish hotels. Now
Oh,
we're
wow.
international, and I'm hosting an event in Paris in a month.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah,
Awesome.
so I have a lot of big things in my life that I do, and that goes back to being raised kind of on a big stage, as I mentioned.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, that's amazing. I like what you said, that this crossroads intersection of secular and sacred. That's powerful. That's the intertwined life. That's what we're all about here. And like you're saying, it is an area, especially with divorce, that are not enough, the church doesn't address enough. Christian women don't speak up enough, about that in
Mhm.
that transition in that time. And we should. People should speak into that space when they have a testimony and a story of God walking them through that. So I think it's brave, but it's also very, very powerful and needed. So that's what we're all about, sharing stories. That's how we
Right?
connect with others. So, um, wow, blessed disruption. Mm. So, what's the story behind the book? I feel like I've got a lot of the story. Where did you feel that call? Like, this is what I'm supposed to do? And was there
Yeah.
one specific disruption, or was it the constant disruptions?
Well, I will say that Blessed Disruption, God gave me the title one morning. I thought it was going to be You Can Be the Head Coach of Your Life or something like that,
Mm,
along the lines of how I grew up. And one morning in my quiet time, God said, here's your title. And I
mm,
searched online. There was nothing, to see if it's someone. I'm like, surely someone has used that title or put it together. And it was like, he said, nope, this is for you. Here you go.
so good.
And I was an English writing major my first year of college, and then I switched to business. And then I thought I was going to be a newscaster. I talked myself out of that. One of the major themes of my book is playing small and
Mm,
how to break through to play and light up the scoreboard of your life.
I love it.
Um, and when he gave me that title, I was like, that's it. That's it. And so that propelled me forward into writing about how we can intentionally disrupt five major areas of our life to break through to that sweetness and that wholeness that God really has for us.
Mm,
Because when I grew up, the church seemed, I don't know, it was a little bit distant and kind of like it was prescribed to me. And even though I became a believer, I didn't really feel that fire in my heart,
mm,
right? And that led me into my first marriage and being disconnected and so many things that happen in life.
yeah.
Now, the connection that I have in my walk with Jesus is mine, and it's
Yes.
not handed out like a prescription.
Yes, yes. Oh, that's so good. My husband and I talk about that a lot because with our kids, when you're launching kids, as you know, you have adult children, I've got teenagers, is how if they don't make it real for themselves, it won't hold water when they get out of these doors. It won't. And so we have to not push and prescribe, like you're saying, like shove the medicine down their throat. We have to have it always available and around and part of our everyday lives, not just like get in the car, it's Sunday,
Yeah.
or it's something that we just begrudge all the time, but that it is just part of the fabric of our lives, right? So that it becomes your own.
Yeah, yeah, and that's that intersection of the sacred and secular that I finally found
Yeah.
for myself. And I believe as a parent, especially living out the
Mm,
faith, living out my own faith. And as kids get older, they need to make their own decisions. They need to choose for themselves. Because if
absolutely.
they don't, I mean, to a point, when they get old enough, but I really wanted to raise kids who think for themselves, are independent. They make their own choices, and I'm an
Mm,
encouragement to them. And it's really interesting because all three of my kids are very strong,
great.
independent,
Yeah.
kind human beings. And it's just a joy. Yeah.
That's wonderful. And you're right. We have to parent and serve out of the overflow Like if it's Matthew 6:33, right? Seek ye first the kingdom of God, the other things will be
Mm,
added to you. And if
mhm.
we are spending our own time with the Lord and we're growing in that walk and in that intentionality, that will overflow instead of just trying to force something that we ourselves aren't even drinking from.
Right,
Yeah.
right. Yeah, and that's what happens when we're just kind of given things and they don't integrate, right?
Yes.
So how do they
Yes.
sink in? How do they permeate and become indwelled within us? And so for me, that took a while. And
Yeah,
that's a
sure.
lot of what my book is about.
So I was going to ask, was there one pivotal moment where
Mm.
that transition came where it became not just part of your life, but now your life is
Yeah, yeah. So going back to your earlier question too, I'll tie that together. So I belong to a global organization called EO, Entrepreneurs Organization, and as a female in business, and it's a high achieving organization. You need to have $1 million annual revenue or higher. So it's a pretty elite
nice.
group. But for me, I found my tribe in that because I needed community in the business world, and there's a lot of great things that EO brought to me through that. We have an event called EO Talks. It's like a TED Talk style.
Nice.
And I had co-chaired it for a few years. And my co-chair was like, Susie, are you sure? Because I never felt called or like I had anything that I really needed or wanted to talk about. Well, God said, okay, it's time. It's time after this work you've been doing and was still doing to share your story. So I didn't know what I was going to talk about. I named my talk Feel Your Fear and Do It Anyway, because that's how I felt.
It's good. Yeah.
And I worked with speaker coaches and gave that first one, and they kept saying, save it for the book, save it for the book. So they planted the seeds. And after giving another one in Orange County to about 600 EO members, I prayed before that, God, if this is a path you have for me, please show me.
Yeah.
And the standing ovation after, and then 50 of them came up to me after one on one, thanking me for sharing my story. And I said, okay, I get it.
Yeah. There's a space for this. Yeah.
Yeah,
Oh,
yeah.
that's wonderful. So are those online? Are there places that people can watch some of these talks you've given?
So we've had them online previously, and I think I'm just going to start bringing clips back. And I did a course a couple years ago, an online course called Head to Heart, because for
Nice.
so long I lived in my head and
Mm,
that disconnection that I spoke about earlier. I didn't know how to connect my mind and my heart. And through the disruptions that I chose, disrupting yourself, your path, your story, your belief systems, and your mindset, all those things, once I disrupted those, it was like I had a clear playing field
yeah.
and was able to connect everything. And, when I left my first husband, I received a scarlet letter from my church, and that
Yeah.
that was really painful.
Mhm.
However, now looking back, I can see how at the time that's just kind of what they did, and to not carry that anger and that resentment around. I
Mm.
think for so many of us, we tend to stuff our emotions and our bad thoughts,
Yeah. Yeah.
um, and giving room and space and talking to God about that and bringing it up. It's a pretty peaceful existence I have now.
Nice. I always say, tell God how you feel. He already knows anyway, right?
Right.
Let's just be really real with the Lord because we'll actually make progress that way. So I
Yeah.
want
And
to
then he's like,
hear,
okay, finally, you get it. Yeah.
yeah, like, okay, now we can actually work with this. You're being honest and upfront. So I
Yeah.
want to hear about this two things, and you come at it from whatever way you want, but you talked about you're playing small and it's time to make that transition to start playing big. And the other thing I love is most of the time when people hear about these blessed disruptions, they think, okay, it was the divorce, it was the sickness, it was the loss, this thing that happened out of my control that God disrupted my life and then I made choices. But you're coming at it from a totally different perspective. And it's
Yeah.
kind of like when you call the timeout and you throw the flag, like to use the football
Exactly.
analogies, you are choosing to disrupt things. So I guess a few questions and you run with it. But what brought you to the point that, okay, I'm choosing to disrupt? What helped
Mhm.
you realize I can choose to disrupt this? You know,
Yeah.
and and then what does that look like? How do you disrupt what's going on and stop those cycles? This is like so good. So this is such a
Oh.
different perspective. So great.
Yeah, and it's again being a coach's daughter, I weave a football theme and kind of that throughout, which again I think is a little unique, and maybe men will be a little more interested in reading it too. So playing small is different for everybody. And to me, playing
That's good.
small is living a less than life than who God created us to be.
Yeah.
So we're each created so uniquely, so beautifully. And for me, I always had this like nagging feeling like, Suzie, you're made for more. I have bigger plans for you. And I kept myself small by poor choices and bad habits and, just things that I write about in my book are like limiting beliefs, all those things that are so common and universal, but they look different for everybody. So
Yeah.
for me, I'll just use the newscaster example as one because I write about that. I thought I was going to be a newscaster, recorded a demo tape, thought I was going to be the next Gene Anderson and the news anchor. And I watched the demo tape and I was like absolutely horrified.
Oh.
And I talked myself out of it because I didn't think I could put myself out there for public judgment.
Mm.
And to me, that was playing small, even though I didn't really know it at the time.
Yeah.
And not to say that my life has been bad because of that. That was fine. Things happen, right?
Mhm.
But if we're not expressing and being all who we can be, who God created us to be, then we're
Yeah.
playing small. And
Yeah.
that, again, every day is different. It could be as, small as not having a conversation with a family member when you know that that's a really important, they're struggling. Or
Mhm.
it could be not saying yes to a big opportunity like being a newscaster.
Mhm.
Um, so yeah, I try to paint the picture in my book so that people can think about and journal about like, hey, what am I thinking about? And that's another big thing in the mindset piece. Think about what you want and think 10 times bigger.
Mm.
For someone like me, that's really powerful. My oldest daughter, she is a mom. She has two little. She's due again in August with number three.
Oh.
And her life, she absolutely adores. So her thinking big is all around her kids and her family and how to support her husband.
Sure.
So that's I think it's a beautiful thing because she's choosing what's big for her. And you don't have to be
Exactly.
big and flashy and all that sort of thing. It's
I
full.
love that.
It's a wholeness. It's a fullness.
Yes, and you know when you are living in that fullness how God has uniquely designed you, right? And I
Yeah.
love that because we can't go around and see someone else's big and decide that if our existence doesn't match their, then oh, I'm not living well. That's not the point. The point is in your heart and in your time with the Lord, which only that one-on-one quiet time with the Lord is going to help you know, right, what big is
Yep.
in his eyes for you. And it
Yes.
doesn't have to look like anyone else, but you know if you're not stepping into the fullness that he's called you to. And so
Oh,
I love that. And the newscaster,
mm-hmm.
you were comparing your beginning to someone else's finish line, right? You're
Mm,
thinking if this right out of the gate doesn't look like my idol, then I'm not good enough.
right.
And they didn't start that way. That's not where they started out. And I think a lot of times we do that with anything that we enter into. For me, there is still that perfectionist tendency. And when I
Mm,
compare what I have to someone else's, it's just not enough. It's not good enough, or I'm going to let people down, or, and not being afraid of those limiting beliefs, like you
right.
were saying.
Right. So there's three sections in my book, and the first section is called The Show because it
Nice.
was all about the external. How does it look? The perfectionism, the achievement,
Mhm.
looking good, staying busy, being on life's treadmill.
Mm.
And inside, I was just, really barren. And without giving too much of the book away, because
Yes,
I do hope people
absolutely.
buy it and read it or listen to it, it's not just one disruption for me and not just one trauma. There are multiple, including two miscarriages. And trauma for everyone, again, is different.
Yes.
It can be a little t trauma, a big T trauma. I think we have a tendency to feel like the trauma needs to be really extreme for it to be considered trauma.
Yeah.
And it's not. I mean, anything that impacts us and has a lasting negative effect can
Mhm.
be classified as trauma.
Yeah.
I have learned for myself that the less I try to label and the more I try to understand and process through it, the better the results.
That's
If
good.
I label other people, if I label myself, I think right now a lot of people are like, I have anxiety, I have depression, I have this and that. And not that that's wrong, but if that's what we're focusing on, then we
Yes.
get stuck.
Mm-hmm.
And for me, that was a really powerful lesson to learn that I still learn every day. And
Mm-hmm.
the more that we allow ourselves the space and the grace to move through it, the better our lives and that integration and the more full and whole we're going to be.
That's so good. That's good. You made me think the phrase that came to mind is, if we're not careful, our labels become our limits. And
Yes.
I think that's beautiful because it is okay to experience something, to deal with something, but not to make that who you are. It's like Jesus and the man at the pool of Bethesda, who'd been there for 40 years is like, do you really want to get well? That always like stops me because there is a time where sometimes we're coming to God and complaining and complaining and complaining about our smallness or our struggles or whatever. And he's like, do you really want to get well? Because sometimes we just want to carry around our label.
Bingo. And we want to stay victim and we want to, all the things I did.
Me
That,
too.
yeah, I mean, and another thing I've learned is the voices and the inputs that we choose
Mm-hmm.
are so important. And when we choose to be in the Word and choose to listen to God's voice and choose to fellowship and worship, which is a big part of my life,
Yeah.
our lives are different.
Mm-hmm.
Our mind, we're different, right? So if you
Absolutely.
compare the inputs, whether it's junk TV or reality TV or news on 24/7, whatever, it's different for everybody.
Yeah.
Versus what's really going to fill us and expand us. And that's a constant choice for me. And so I think curating our inputs,
Nice.
right?
Yeah.
And there were so many good inputs, this podcast being one of them, where the conversations that we have are really, really transformational.
Yeah. Absolutely. Who's ready to make these disruptions in their life? How do you know it's time and when's it actually going to work? Right?
Right, right. So I got to a point where I didn't know how I was going to go on because I was so empty inside. And I needed to, this is how I felt at the time. I felt like I needed to break free from what I felt was kind of oppression and repression and labeling and staying small and not being allowed to express myself and be who I was created to be. And when we get to that point, we need to pay attention, right? So if our voice inside is screaming like escape, run, that's something to pay attention to. Um, I think that happens to everybody at one point or another. And then when we do that, what are we choosing? So at that point, I didn't know what I was choosing. I was like, I just need to find myself. I need to save myself. Um, I think for women, especially in the church, understanding who we are at our core and that we don't need anyone else to define us. I love being a mom. I loved being a wife. I love being a gaga, a grandma.
That's what my mom's called.
Love it. Those roles, however, don't define me. I'm a child of God.
Mhm.
And the
Mhm.
more that we can tune into that divine purpose
Yeah.
and not let all the other stuff, all the labels get in the way,
Hmm.
it's scary to choose disruption. And then when it happens, unintentional disruption, that happened in my life when my husband had an affair with my best friend.
Mm.
And
Mm.
at the bottom, I was like, okay, what am I going to do?
Yeah.
God met me there, and I decided I was going to transform myself first so I could transform my life because I knew it started with me.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Mm. Yeah. Ugh. Yeah.
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 Things
Life can,
things like that happen. And
yeah.
if we're not talking about it, that's where the depression and the loneliness and
Yes.
even worse comes into play. So that's part of my mission is just to
Bring it
talk
into
about
the light.
it. Things happen.
Yeah. Bring it into the light. There are so many things
Yes.
that life is messy.
Yeah.
Life is messy.
Yeah.
And you don't have to say like, oh, either I have a good relationship with the Lord and life is rosy, or bleh. You know,
Right.
it's like, no,
Yeah.
I can be walking with the Lord and stuff get messy, but it's his strength that's going to help me go through this. But then on the other side of that, to turn around, and I like to say my mess is my message. You know,
Yeah.
bring that into the light, show people. It's the ultimate backfire when we take
It
the
is.
messes, but yet we let it be used for God's glory. However,
Yeah.
this is my story. This is what I learned. This is
Ye-
what I've been through, and I will walk with you through this too.
Bingo.
That's what it's all about. That's
Bingo.
that's good.
And that's where my relationship with Jesus really took root
Mm.
because he met me there and I walked and he pulled me and gave me this, I call it my staircase of personal transformation. And that's going to be in my playbook that'll come out. And I can, look back now and I can see all of the miracles that happened as a result. And, whenever something happens now in my life, it's like, well, that's a blessed disruption. What are the blessings in the disruption?
Mm.
And how can I be a blessed disruption?
Mm.
Because disruption is not bad. Disruption can be very, very good,
Yeah.
especially if we're stuck and we're in those dark places.
Hmm.
And it's scary. It does take courage and faith. One thing I learned is just to take one step at a time. Choose
Yeah.
that next right step, whatever you think that is, and have God show you. Ask, say, what's the next right step? So that's what I did.
Yeah.
And again, not perfect. Things continue. But like you said, it's all in that daily relation. That's what relationships are all about. They're
Yeah.
messy, they're imperfect. And when we come to God vulnerable and open and ready to receive, he will show us the path that he has for us.
Hey, friend, if you enjoyed this episode and you got some good stuff out of it, there's a few options you have. One, you could click that little subscribe button. And also, if you would review this podcast, oh my gosh, if you like what you heard, get on there, give it a 5-star review. If you didn't like what you heard, just pretend it never happened, okay? But if you would do a review for me, just take a couple seconds and do that. Not only would I be crazy excited, but also it would just be a great way for us to partner together, for you to help this podcast be seen by more women out there. And you could be a part of helping more women discover these practical ways to apply God's word to just everyday stuff. So I would love it, love it, love it if you could help me out in one of those two ways.